I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, another episode where we have to be mindful of potentially developing news. Was trying to follow some news that I know you were on top of yesterday. There have been reports surfacing that Russian and Belarusian players might not be allowed in future CHL import drafts. So obviously, we're talking about young potential NHL prospects going through the junior system in Canada. Dan Milstein, a prominent agent who has a lot of Russian clients, he put that out there. It looks as if it was going to happen. It didn't come to fruition yesterday. Yesterday being Wednesday, but the Canada-Russia series that normally happens between young Russian prospects and CHL-based players, that has been put off. That, I believe, has been canceled for 2022. But as of right now, entirely possible by the time you get this episode, things may change. No word on the status of Russian and Belarusian players with regards to the CHL import draft. CJ, obviously, you know what's going on, or you have a better sense of what's going on than I do. What can you tell us at this point now why there has been no decision rendered on that subject?
Well, it was discussed Wednesday, right? There's an executive call, from among the Ontario Hockey League, and they weighed whether or not it was worth, not allowing, essentially banning Russian and Belarusian players from being selected in the import draft. Part of me wonders, how much the tweet from Dan Milstein might have affected the decision or not there, if that maybe applied some pressure. Because, I think there's varying levels to these sanctions, right? It's one thing maybe for the IIHF to say Russia can't compete in a World Under-18 tournament as is happening in April. And then, it's quite something else to maybe say that 16 and 17-year-old Russians can't play in the Canadian Hockey League. And so, the decision's been delayed. I don't get the sense, Julian, I don't think this is going to develop and change in the next 24 hours. I mean, that import draft, typically doesn't happen until June. And so I think there is some time here to see what happens perhaps in the world landscape, keep monitoring what's happening in the sporting landscape, because that's changing every day. I saw this morning, F1 has formally, got rid of the Russian race. Obviously, there's been developments at the Paralympics where Russian and Belarusian athletes have, after initially being allowed to participate as neutrals, aren't being allowed to participate at all. A lot's happening quickly in this time window. And I think the OHL wisely took a bit more time to consider that decision, about how to handle those players from that country in the import draft.
Mm-hmm. So you've already mentioned that we're not expected to hear anything on that anytime soon, at least possibly not by the time you guys listen to this podcast. I'm just curious now if there's anything to be expected at the professional level. We know we have seen some decisions in the last few days with regards to advertising of certain players and associating with Russian businesses and brands with regards to the league, and other professional leagues have done the same thing. I wonder what's going to happen with statuses of players or other things of that nature. I'm just curious if we're expecting to see more.
Well, there's definitely going to be more impact. I actually had a chance to speak to Dan Milstein a couple times on Wednesday. For context, he's got about 75% of the Russian players in the NHL are his clients. Last year he had a number of CHL clients that were taken in the import draft when Russians and Belarusians were allowed to be taken there. Obviously he's got a unique lens into all this because he was born in Ukraine and he was a political refugee that came and lived in the U.S., represents all these Russians. Has sort of deep ties on all sides of this issue. And, he was pretty unequivocal when I asked him that none of his clients are considering leaving the NHL. What we've seen is a number of foreigners have bolted the KHL, wanting to get out of Russia, terminating contracts there. I wondered if, because of some of the uncomfortable situations that the Russian players in North America found themselves in, and, Dan spoke of his clients getting some very threatening, even having, threats to the life of some of his clients come in through social media and DMs and the like, but he was pretty unequivocal that no one's considering leaving here because of the conditions. But obviously, it's an evolving situation and story. I suppose there's the possibility that could change, but at this point in time, roughly 40 players from Russia have played in the NHL this year. I don't see anything happening there, but man, like this is a difficult time. I can't imagine what it's like to be, it's a hard issue, right? I mean, some of the guys we're talking about are 23 years old, really have no connection to this. You have even someone like Nikita Zadorov, who on his Instagram feed put out a no war post, that he's a client of Dan Milstein's. I mean, he's essentially spoken out against the war as a Russian. It's just a polarized, difficult time in the world. And from speaking to Dan, you get that sense this is taking a toll. He said, you got to stop the madness here with some of the things that are happening to his clients. And he says that respectfully as a Ukrainian, who's got friends back in Ukraine, that, we have to be careful, I think, who gets victimized in all this. I mean, I think that there's a fine line between wanting to punish Russia, the country, and send a message to Vladimir Putin specifically, and what happens to other Russians in the world just going about their daily lives.
Absolutely. In your conversation with Dan, did you two get into at any point about what could be done to ensure the safety of some Russian players who may be targeted by threats? A player like Nikita Zadorov, obviously, making his thoughts known about the war in Ukraine, if anything could happen to him, for example. Did you guys get into that particular topic?
We did, and he said the league and the teams have been great. Like he said that they've sort of stepped up security. He didn't get too much more specific than that, maybe for security reasons. But, I got the sense that he feels supported and his clients feel supported by the league and the response they've had. But, it's still a discomforting time. Like, he mentioned one of his clients, his wife had been targeted online and some Nazi language directed at his baby. And, I really can't imagine. I mean, this is a difficult thing for us to watch from this side of the world on CNN or whatever news channel you choose to consume. I think it's quite a different issue if you're European even. I know Finns feel a different way about it, being another neighbor of Russia. It's a little bit more immediate, I think, for people in that situation. And obviously we're talking about players here who probably each and every one of them have family and friends back home that there's some concern about too, just generally. I mean, just not because of specific threats, just because this is an unstable time. And yeah, so, I don't know that there's like specific things he identified, but he did make it very clear that the league has made the players feel comfortable and done what they could to alleviate a difficult situation. But he said, it's a difficult situation. This is an unfortunate time. And I'm really of two minds about it myself, because I understand sanctions against the country, and I don't think the IIHF, as I mentioned in our Monday pod, had much choice but to remove some tournaments from Russia and that type of thing. But now when you're talking about individual Russians, I mean, I can have sympathy for them, because again, we know of at least one that's publicly not supporting the war and is still facing some uncomfortable situations here playing and living in North America.
Yeah, that's the next thing I want to bring up here. Like, I wonder, and I'm not saying it's bad, I'm not saying it's good. I wonder about, I guess, the fairness of if it for the point of restricting Russians from being in an import draft. Some people have said, hey, do we get to a point where we suspend contracts for Russian players in the NHL? Is that fair? Because at the end of the day, you are ultimately going to affect players who want nothing to do with Vladimir Putin, who want nothing to do with the war going on in Ukraine, I should say. That's the biggest question I have with this.
Yeah, and look, this might be generational for me, because I've grown up in a world where the countries I lived in didn't really have war get anywhere near their borders. But I think that's, like, to me, that's totally unfair. I mean, just because you were born in a place, I mean, look, we live in a country that Canada prides itself on having a really open immigration policy of welcoming people from around the world. I mean, to discount people from making a living just because they were born somewhere, and now live here, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, Dan Milstein himself I believe he's about 45. He's lived in the U.S. since he was 16. He's a proud American citizen, lives in Michigan, but he was born in Ukraine, does a lot of business in Russia. I mean, did we disqualify him? I don't think so. I saw, was it Dominic Hasek that was sort of early on, sent some tweets saying that all Russian players' contracts should be terminated. I've seen others sort of take
Suspended.
Suspended. I don't like it. I don't like the idea of that. But this is a polarizing time, and maybe I'd view it differently if it was Russia invading Canada. Maybe I'd think differently about it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to be sensitive to all sides of how you might view what is clearly a complex and emotional issue. But again, sometimes a country takes action that its citizens don't support. So in this case, we're talking about people who live and work in North America, who pay taxes here. The Ovechkin case is very specific, right? I mean, he's got a picture of Vladimir Putin on his Instagram feed. He's been very openly supportive of him in the past. At the same time, Artemi Panarin last year, spoke out against his government. So again, I just think it's to broad brush it and say just because you're Russian, you shouldn't have the right to play in the NHL. I mean, that would be way too far for me. And we should be clear. I've got no intel or haven't heard. I don't think the league's considering that by any stretch. But if we're talking about like right and wrong, what should happen, what shouldn't happen, that to me would be wrong if they ever took that step.
For context, the Dominik Hasek tweets, I know I mentioned them, I think, on the last podcast. I don't know if I actually read through the Twitter thread because it started with him commenting on Alexander Ovechkin's media availability. I'll just read it out because he did write it in English. What? Not only an alibist, a chicken shit, but also a liar. Every adult in Europe knows well that Putin is a mad killer and that Russia is waging an offensive war against the free country and its people. The NHL must immediately suspend contracts for all Russian players. Every athlete represents not only himself and his club, but also his country and its values and actions. That is a fact. If the NHL does not do so, it has indirect co-responsibility for the dead in Ukraine. I also want to write that I am very sorry for those Russian athletes who condemn Vladimir Putin and his Russian aggression in Ukraine. However, at the moment, I also consider their exclusion a necessity. So Dominik Hasek is taking the stance that says every Russian player, regardless of whether you are for Vladimir Putin or not, should have their contract suspended. And yeah, I'm with you, CJ. Like, it's such a difficult situation to maneuver through with the idea of even considering that. There are guys who support Putin. There are guys who don't support Putin. And also, if it's going to get to a point where you're going to try to determine which guy is which, not to say that anyone would lie about that sort of thing, but what's stopping a player from saying that they don't support Putin as a way to ensure they don't get suspended? I think those are just different things. I think if you're the league, even if you were considering this, which, as you just said, they are not, or at least it doesn't seem like they are, those are things you have to consider. It's a very difficult situation.
It is. And look, I think in our lifetime, we're going to see the idea of countries evolve. I think people are going to be less sort of straight patriotic, and I'm not speaking of any one country. I mean, all countries. I think that we're going to reorganize ourselves in a sort of rapidly evolving world. I mean, look, we're doing this podcast now seamlessly. You in Montreal, me in Toronto. We've been in the same room twice, and we've done this podcast for several months. Everyone, the nature of work has changed so much during the pandemic, and I think we're going to see people spread out all over the world more. And I just think there's going to be a reorganization. And so, to me, it's just dangerous to say because you were born in this piece of geography, you can't now live in this and work here. I'm certainly, no part of me is tolerating, an aggressive act by Russia, a completely unprovoked, unlawful invasion of an otherwise free nation. I'm not trying to be unsympathetic to the lives lost in Kiev and other parts of Ukraine. But I also think we have to be careful how far you go with some individuals that are of Russian heritage that really have nothing to do with the conflict. And so, look, I respect Dominik Hasek's position. Again, he's from a country, the Czech Republic, that, has a history with communism, has had, before his time on Earth, but he's probably grown up with relatives with a different view on Russia because of the history between their countries. And so, I can respect that that's his view. I think that would be a huge mistake by the league. And as I say, I've got no reason to believe they're considering an action that drastic. If anything, in fact, I think the league's trying to support Russian players and Belarusian players that are here, make sure that they're safe and that they're looked after properly, versus contemplating removing them entirely from the ability to play.
Anything else on this topic before we move on? This is a developing story. I'm sure we're going to keep talking about it for podcasts to come, as long as the war is going on in Ukraine.
Yeah, I think, the KHL situation is interesting. It's not directly on this topic, but it's sort of a natural spinoff of this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And, and speaking to some agents over in Europe that have clients there, obviously, one guy was telling me he has a player who had the equivalent of $1.2 million in the bank in rubles, and overnight that was worth 700,000 because that currency is collapsing. And, there's been all these international sort of tariffs or restrictions placed on the banking system in Russia. I mean, the KHL it's either the second or third best league professional hockey's played in the world, depending on how you view the American Hockey League versus the KHL. And it's immediately, one of the spinoffs here is a shadow of what it was, with players rushing to get out of the country, some of them losing that money. I mean, let's face it, the reason a lot of foreigners have played in the KHL traditionally, it was proved to be a place to make a lot of money if you couldn't play in the NHL. There's some doubts in some circles about sort of the viability of what the league will even look like next season. And so, just again, we focus on the hockey standpoint of, what's an huge international story is pro hockey out of this isn't going to look the same. I mean, we've already seen a couple teams drop out, but how many teams and if there's a league next season is still an open discussion. And then if there isn't, of course, it's sort of going to be a reordering of things where players play and jobs and all that stuff. And so, I think I find that interesting. They're going ahead with the playoffs here. 2 of the playoff series were walkovers because the teams pulled out. And so the teams they were playing just got to forfeit their way into the next round, which is unusual in itself. And yeah, so I think the KHL will be interesting to watch, even if you're not concerned about which team wins the Gagarin Cup in the next 2 months. It's just what form it takes and if it becomes a place that players want to go play, especially those that aren't from Russia originally.
Well said. Yes, as I mentioned before, we're going to track this story a lot as long as we see more stuff from it. And again, it's a developing situation. It's entirely possible we could see more developments with regards to Russian and Belarusian players, whether at the pro level or at the junior level, by the time we get the podcast, by the time we get back on Monday. So CJ and I will be on top of that. We'll also be on top of a whole bunch of other different stories in and around the NHL as well. We're not going to do a trading pile today, only because, the hot stove can only generate so much. I know there are people who ask every episode, why don't we talk about this player? Why don't we talk about that player? Just like a lot of people like to joke around that CJ will repeat stories on this podcast. I don't know if people are going to like the fact that he's going to repeat information about what's out there with Claude Giroux and John Klingberg. So we're going to keep that for
my host. If I'm going to repeat a story, you got to stop me before I get too far into it again. Because
at the same time, I kind of liked hearing the Subban Nashville Predator story a third time. Sorry.
It's hard. You only have so many stories in your life, right?
I mean, yeah.
And, we record this thing twice a week. I forget what I've told you personally, what I've told, if I've said it on the pod. Like, you kind of get the wires crossed a little bit. So,
I think you mentioned that story on the SDP too.
I was going to say, I'm rewarding the loyal listeners that have listened to every pod, so they know I'm repeating the stories. Like, you got to be an OG to even realize I'm repeating the story. I mean, you got to be really invested in this thing. And so I thank you if you've heard a few of these stories a few times.
Are we at a point now where we've done the podcast long enough that if you've we have OG listeners of the podcast? I think that works for the SDP. Does that work for us? Are we at that point yet? We're almost 50 episodes? That could work.
50 episodes. They were supposed to be half-hour shows. As we know, they're basically 45 minutes to an hour each. I mean, we've recorded somewhere probably 40 hours of pod, maybe even more. And some people have probably listened to every one of them from start to finish, which is awesome. I know my dad has. He's an OG listener.
Shout out Ian Johnson. Let's go.
But there's a few others
let's do it.
There's a few others out there.
Let us know in the comment section on YouTube if you have listened to every single podcast of the Chris Johnston Show. We appreciate you very much. People, it's Julian here with a message from Athletic Greens. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient and daily nutrition, especially heading into the flu and cold season. It's not a fun time. In just one scoop and a cup of water every day, that's it. That's literally it. That's amazing. No need for a million different other pills and supplements and all that extra stuff. Athletic Greens is it. To make it easy, Athletic Greens will give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your very first purchase. All you have to do, visit athleticgreens.com/Johnston. It's CJ's last name. Like, how easy? It doesn't get any easier than that. athleticgreens.com/Johnston to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Basketball and hockey, very much in full swing. And for many of us, there's no better way to enjoy the games than by having some skin in the game. That is why BetMGM remains the exclusive betting partner of The Athletic. And as a fan of The Athletic, you can bet $10 to win $150 plus a free 3-month subscription or extension of your subscription to The Athletic when you bet with BetMGM using our promo code. Sign up at betmgm.com and use the promo code TheAthleticPod at checkout to take advantage of this special offer from the king of sportsbooks. That's bet $10 to win $150 plus 3 months free from The Athletic at betmgm.com. And you have to use the promo code TheAthleticPod at checkout. The Athletic Pod, all in one word. New customer offer. Visit betmgm.com for terms and conditions. There is a topic I want to get to, which I understand because you are in that market. You know, you have the insights on that. And I also understand
each podcast again, because everyone's going to get on with that too.
That's what I'm saying. I'm just trying to add this disclaimer. We are not a Leafs podcast. We're not trying to be a Leafs podcast. CJ just happens to work in Toronto, and the Leafs goaltending situation happens to be in the spotlight right now. So we're going to spend a few minutes on it.
Well, I mean, look, they're one of the top teams in the league. And in the last week, they've won a game 10-7 and lost a game 5-1 to Buffalo. So, I mean, just that mix alone, you know, it's notable. Only in Toronto could this be happening.
In Toronto. Good Lord. At this point, I'm just watching LFRs, just wondering, when is Steve literally just going to put on clown makeup or Joker makeup just turn into the Joker? Because what's going on in Toronto right now between Jack Campbell and Peter Mrazek is absolutely ridiculous. Like they've just turned into shells of themselves. Like the goaltending's bad.
Oh, it's been bad, like sub 900 bad since January 1st, you know, for over 2 months now. Again, on a team that's winning. But, you know, it helps when you score as much as the Leafs scored. You can let in 7 and still win the game in regulation, as the Leafs did in Detroit last weekend. Someone mentioned to me, Jim Ralph, who does the color commentary for the Leafs radio broadcast, that the Leafs played 3 games against Detroit this year. Detroit scored 15 goals and lost all 3 games in regulation. So that's difficult to do. I mean, since the 1980s, that might have been normal, but, you know, we're a long way beyond the 80s. Yeah, look, it's a fascinating situation. I think they're 2 distinct things, even though they're 2 goaltenders giving similarly unpredictable performances. But, you know, Jack Campbell was unbelievable for half a season and has just lost it. And, you know, it's acknowledged that it's a mental thing as much as anything. And, yeah, sympathetic to that, but man, that scares you, I think, if you're a fan of the team. And then in, you know, Peter Mrazek's case, he just hasn't played very much. And so it's hard, you know, it doesn't look good against Buffalo. You know, I'm not really, it's not, for me, I can't hang that all on him. It was not a very good game for the team. They gave up some gruesome defensive lapses that led to some of those scoring chances. But, you know, the guy missed most of the first half of the season with 2 different groin injuries and just hasn't played a lot. And, you know, he's proven himself to be an average to slightly above average goaltender over a long NHL career, but you don't know what you're going to get from him on any given point right now, because I don't think he's found that groove, and it doesn't help that the other guy's struggling. So, you know, I think the natural question is the deadline. You know, will the Leafs be active? I'm sure they'll look around. The problem I see is there's not an obvious solution here. There's not one goaltender out there that's clearly available. You could say, like, yes, give up a bunch of assets, go get him. Everything will be fine. There's a lot of hope out there for some of the other goaltenders, whether it's a guy like Jonas Corposalo in Columbus, who's likely to be moved. Even Braden Holtby might be moved by Dallas, although I think it depends where they sit in terms of the playoff picture. That might not end up materializing either. I mean, there's not a sure thing. I mean, goaltending, as we know, by its nature, is not a sure thing. There's only a few goalies every year, like Andrei Vasilevsky, who just give you absolute confidence. Like, he just above average, amazing all the time. He had 4 shutouts in Tampa's 4 clinching games in the playoffs last year, which is unbelievable. But beyond those real high performers, there's a mystery there, and I don't think there's any hiding from the fact the Leafs have sprung a leak defensively, and it doesn't help. I think naturally the play runs through the team when the goalies aren't sharp. Like, everyone's trying not to make a mistake instead of sort of playing free. And this is a big point in the season because the Leafs don't actually play. They've got a run here of games against sort of non-playoff teams, so you're not going to see them against top competition much before March 21st. When management has to make its final decision what the roster is going to look like, for the playoffs. And the difficult decision with so much riding on this year, just the idea, because, the Leafs, again, have been an elite team in pretty much every way you measure that, everywhere else. But, it could all be upended by goaltending if they don't get this sorted out.
Joseph Woll, any other options in house that could work as stopgaps?
Eric Kallgren, they have, he's down in the American Hockey League. He actually won a Swedish league title last year and then signed as a free agent. All of those, we would, if it comes to playing one of those two guys, though, we're talking Hail Mary territory. Like,
yes,
that's like going to Jordan Binnington back when the Blues went to him in that 2018-19 season when he started the year as their 5th goalie and just, caught fire and won a Stanley Cup, and he's been in the NHL ever since. I guess that could play out, but it's not. I wouldn't label either of those as high percentages at this point in time. I don't know. Maybe you look to someone like James Reimer, in San Jose. But I just don't see an obvious fix. And I think so. That's, if you're in the front office, obviously you're just hoping this fixes itself. Like, you're just hoping that Jack Campbell rediscovers. He played 70 games as a Maple Leaf at like a .920 save percentage. Like, it's like he has shown over a meaningful stretch of time that he can be someone you can trust to play a lot of games. It's just now it's a meaningful stretch the other way where really the last 2 months, there's some crooked numbers going up on his stat sheet. And, the fact that he's acknowledged, mentally, you wonder, look, he's in a contract here. Like, I can sympathize with the struggle that might be when all of a sudden you're going the wrong way, you're thinking you're costing yourself money, it could get in your mind. Like, I don't think it's entirely implausible that that's part of what's gone on here. Jack hasn't told me that himself, but he did acknowledge in Vegas. I had a chance to talk to him on the All-Star weekend that it's been on his mind, the contract and some of that uncertainty. And so, I mean, this is why we watch sports, right? It's like a constant sort of soap opera, if you will. I don't know how, like, I can't imagine it continues this poorly for this long. But you never know. And the longer it continues as we get up to the 21st of March, I do think it puts more pressure on trying to find some kind of solution out there to turn the tide.
James Reimer, you mentioned that name, James Reimer. We all know someone who would be very excited to dust off his $60 James Reimer action figure or doll. I would be very excited about that. And that's our good buddy, Steve Dangle. So
that was like a little Easter egg in this episode for Steve Dangle, just to like perk up his ears,
I look back at that clip. I don't know if you've seen that like old episode, I think for like 3 years ago, where like basically Adam and Jesse are shaming him for spending $60 on that doll. That is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Oh man, yeah. For everyone else watching this podcast who hasn't seen it, go look that up. Speaking of goalies, it's funny that we're talking about the Leafs goaltending situation, knowing that 2 minor deals kind of happened yesterday. The Flames got Michael McNiven from the Montreal Canadiens. I think that guy, if you really look down the Canadiens' depth chart, I think would be like 5th or 6th further down their depth chart. Now, Alex Stalock making the move from the Edmonton Oilers. And both those deals, I think, for future considerations is just I'm just gonna put my tinfoil hat on here. Is there anything to those? Is someone trying to clear salary for something? Something going on?
I'd love to say yes. I think in both cases, it's more doing the goaltender a favor. Finding him a new opportunity, new organization interested in him. Future considerations for those at home that don't follow this closely literally mean nothing. The polite way of saying we're giving this player to another organization for nothing. And, Alex Daylock, I believe he was a long haul COVID case after being in Edmonton. And I think it's just giving him a new organization, fresh start. San Jose has their AHL team in the same city as the NHL team. So whether he's an AHL or an NHLer, he can live in that area and try to find his way back to the NHL. McNiven, as you mentioned, is just buried down the depth chart. And I think it's really more about finding those players some new opportunities somewhere else, more than a precursor of what's to come.
Okay. All right. So taking the tinfoil hat off, nothing to see here with those two. Hey, wow. You said yourself, you like a good conspiracy theory. So I was just curious.
Well, and I would love to tell you it's something else. Blockbuster is the next shoe to drop, but I'm pretty sure Calgary is pretty well situated in net right now with, Jacob Markstrom at the top of their food chain having such a phenomenal year. San Jose, I guess we could maybe make a case just because their season probably isn't heading towards a playoff spot, although it kind of hung around. But I think more likely than not, it's just doing right by some individual players than anything that sort of organizationally is going to change.
I don't remember, speaking of the San Jose Sharks, I don't remember if we've mentioned this guy's name at all in the trading pile. You can tell me if I'm wrong here, but if the Sharks are going to fall fast, or not fall fast, but if they're going to fall out of contention for the playoffs, I wonder what that means for Tomas Hertl and his future with the Sharks. I don't know if we've talked about him that much on the show. I don't think we have.
We haven't. And, at this point, the Sharks are still trying to sign him. And so, it's not clear to other teams. It's not clear to me if he'll be available at the deadline. I think that they have a difficult choice if it gets to the deadline and they haven't found common ground on a contract extension, because there's probably a pretty good case to be built to deal him. I still don't know how many buyers we're going to have in this marketplace. I mean, obviously there's a few sort of obvious ones, and we've talked about Colorado and even Florida, Toronto. I think Calgary will try to bolster things on their blue line. Like there are teams out there obviously that are going to be adding, but I think one danger we have is we have quite a number of players of semi-prominence or prominence that could be available for the right price. I just don't know how many teams are stepping up to pay those prices. And so, it's that will definitely be a situation we'll be monitoring closely because the contract talks are ongoing as we're recording this. Mm-hmm. It seems like there's some positivity there, but the Sharks have to be smart too, right? I mean, someone in Tomas Hertl's situation is going to want some term on his deal. They're kind of in a turn it over phase still, and so how long do they want to sign him for? I think that's probably the delicate part of that negotiation. But at this point in time, the focus is on signing him. Much like Philip Forsberg in Nashville, and even the players in Anaheim, Hampus Lindholm and the like. But in all those situations, it could turn in a week or so if it just looks like contract talks aren't going to produce a new deal.
Seller's market on March 21st?
I think it's a buyer's market to me, just because I don't think there's a ton of teams buying. I think Montreal got criticized a little bit for the Toffoli deal in some corners. I think they did well to get ahead of that market and at least sell that piece, because if you say you have to trade a certain player, I think there's a danger of not getting full value back. It's even something Pat Verbeek said, the new Anaheim Ducks GM, in an article with Pierre LeBrun this week, that he's trading his UFAs if they're not signed. Well, what happens if the market isn't great? Are you trading those guys for a 4th round pick? I'm guessing not. I mean, who knows? But I think this might end up being a buyer's market as it develops. Just my sense of things. I mean, the problem is no teams have cap room to buy. Yeah. It's just really boring. And if you've heard it somewhere else, this isn't high level analysis, but it's also just the truth. Unfortunately, the hard salary cap places some limitations on what can happen. And so I just don't see a ton of buying that's going to happen. And so I think sellers are going to be in a difficult spot if they're convinced they have to, move certain players. They just might not be getting full value back for them in return.
What's the first thing you're going to do once you leave TSN studios after trade deadline day, March 21st, after you go home?
Well, I don't think I'm going to go directly home. There's already been some talk with Pierre LeBrun. I don't know how much I want to share about his personal business, but he's on an alcohol-free month leading up to trade deadline. And he wants to go for a nice dinner with some red wine once we get on that night of trade deadline. So there's been talk of a steakhouse maybe, but it's the plans aren't finalized. But my guess is it won't be like a wild night. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but it'll probably be a nice meal and a nice bottle or two of red wine with Mr. LeBron and anyone else who ends up sharing that dinner with us.
Okay, so definitely, I mean, we already established this, but we're definitely not going to have a podcast on the Monday.
If you wanted to do that, I could do the pod, but I think we're going to do the Tuesday pod.
We're going to do the Tuesday. We're going to do the Tuesday.
Who knows? Maybe I'll be playing hurt. You'll get to know how many bottles of wine there were, I guess, depending on my performance that Tuesday.
Yeah, that might be your Jordan flu game. We'll see. Okay.
Well, there's never an excuse to maybe overindulge. Getting through the trade deadline when you're in my kind of job is one of them. I'm actually enjoying myself still to this point. Like, I'm not beaten down by it. Like, some years I do feel beaten down by this point, but I'm fresh still. So maybe it won't be as much a relief as it can be. But some years it's like climbing Everest.
Oh yeah. Especially when it culminates in like a day where like there's not as much activity going on, and the one trade you're worried about is like, I don't know, like Stephen Weiss moving to like Detroit or something.
I believe that happened one year. That's a
yes.
Yes, it can be.
Yes,
it can be a long 8 hours of live TV. Let's put it that way, or whatever the timeline is.
For sure. So make sure you enjoy yourself that day. I want to move on to some GM news. Kyle Davidson, who was the interim GM for Chicago Blackhawks as of late October, in light of everything that went on with the organization, with your deal with Kyle Beach and the resignations that happened after, he ends up having the interim tag taken off of him, and he is now the full-time GM of the Chicago Blackhawks, beating out two other candidates. Mathieu Darche, who the director of player personnel in Tampa, was linked to Montreal, was also linked to Vancouver, and Jeff Greenberg, who was the AGM, who's now still the AGM of the Chicago Cubs. And looking at how things are going in baseball, I'm not sure Jeff Greenberg's going to have that much to do for the foreseeable future, but we'll see how that goes with negotiations. Any thoughts on Kyle Davidson as GM?
Well, I mean, he obviously had to. That was a long process for him to endure to keep the job. I mean, he was the interim GM since October, late October.
Yes.
So that's several months and he acknowledged himself he didn't know over that 4-month stretch there were times he wondered if he would get the job. I actually had heard, by the way, that Jeff Greenberg, I think he might have been the actual runner-up. Like, I think he was very close to getting the job, which, in an alternate universe would be very un-hockey to hire someone completely from another sport to do that. I mean, from a thought experiment, that would have been interesting. But I mean, Kyle Davidson's got his own great story. He joined the Blackhawks organization 12 years ago as an unpaid intern. And he's, still not yet 40, and he's now the general manager of the team at, what's really an interesting juncture in the organization's history. I mean, clearly they have a lot of rebuilding to do, sort of in the community, off ice, things unrelated to wins or points in the standings, because of everything that's gone on around the organization. And he's also taking over when he's got 1 year beyond this season of Patrick Kane, Jonathan Taves under contract, franchise legends. So those guys finish their careers in Chicago, and, he'll have pretty important decision there or set of conversations with those players to see what they want to do. And he was pretty open about this being a full-scale rebuild. He didn't place specific timelines, but he said, I don't know if it'll be 3 years or it'll be 5 years. I mean, he's opening up the possibility it's a 5-year kind of rebuild, which is quite different than the way Stan Bowman, his predecessor, was acting when he, traded away a first-round pick last year for Seth Jones and gave Seth Jones an 8-year contract. And so, I think that it's quite a spot for Kyle Davidson to find himself in. I don't know him personally, but I've heard nothing but great things about him from people around the league that have dealt with him. Very smart, thoughtful guy. I thought he came across great in his press conference this week when he was, unveiled as the GM. Danny Wirtz, his boss, said that right from the moment they were looking to fill the job, he made it clear he wanted the job. And so, I think we'll reserve some judgment on until we see what he's able to do in that position. But It was a pretty thorough process that Chicago underwent. They even interviewed Teresa Resch, who works for the Toronto Raptors, in addition to some other hockey candidates, more traditional hockey candidates like Peter Chiarelli, Eric Tulsky from Carolina. Got an interview, Scott Mellenby as well, former Canadiens executive. But, I'm fascinated to see with Kane and Taves in particular how that goes, because I think a lot of it will be dictated by those players. Obviously, they have no movement clauses in their contract, but also just what they mean to the organization. Do they want to go play somewhere else, or is it important to them to have full careers in Chicago? I think that's still to be determined.
Man, such interesting situations in Pittsburgh and Chicago, in the sense that they have these legacy veterans who have been forefronts of Stanley Cup championship winning teams. And ultimately, they should really be able to go out on their own terms. But what do you do if you're the GM of those franchises and you're trying to just, move to the transition to another phase of your franchise's history? And in particular in Chicago, between Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, who on the ice, strictly speaking, they have meant a lot to the team in terms of the championships that they've won. What do you do if you're Kyle Davidson? It's a good question.
Well, and it's sort of different situations. I mean, those are teams
Yes.
that competed. They were two of the best teams in the exact same era. They each won 3 cups kind of over that era. But, Chicago's been adrift for a few seasons now where they haven't really been in the playoff mix at all. I know they played in the bubble and beat Edmonton there in 2020 and the expanded playoffs, but they really haven't been a playoff team of consequence for 5 or 6 years. Pittsburgh still, even this year, to me, they're defying gravity again. Mark Donk and the
Buzz
carrying the Penguins to glory. But, even Sidney Crosby, if you look, he had a slow start to the season. He had a wrist surgery, in September. But what he's played the last 3 months, he's scoring like crazy, putting up points like crazy. They never fall off the Penguins. And so it's a little different, because I think it's easier in Pittsburgh in a sense to try to extend this window as long as they can. That being said, Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang are both pending unrestricted free agents. So, if you're going to keep the band together, you've got to sign those players and sort of figure out how to navigate that. Chicago, I think there's more of a case to really tear it down because of, the recent lack of success. And, someone like Patrick Kane, again, continues to be extremely productive player. I'm sure there are contenders out there that would love to have him, especially if Chicago ate some salary to make that cap hit a little easier to digest. But, I do think it'll rest with those guys. I have to imagine one of that group plays somewhere else. Just for fun, Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Kane, and Taves. One of those players, I would be surprised if all 5 of them retire either as full-time Penguins or full-time Blackhawks. I would think, I just don't know yet who's moving on. I mean, I think if we rank them, I think Crosby is probably the least likely to play anywhere else. I really believe he'll spend his whole career in Pittsburgh, but who knows? I mean, things change quickly in pro sports sometimes. And, especially with an athlete, you just have so few years to chase championships or to do that. I mean, we've seen a number of guys move around the league late in their career after being sort of associated with one franchise. And so I'd be surprised if they all retired where they've been, but I don't yet know who's going to move on and when and how and all the circumstances of that.
One guy who I was actually thinking about yesterday and their future and the possibility of them moving on elsewhere is Chris Letang, or Letang, depending on which part of the country of Canada you may be from. I thought for a little bit, I was like, if the Canadians are actually supposed to be aggressive in free agency, what's it going to cost to bring back I think 34-year-old Chris Letang or Letang back to Montreal? And then apparently that day he said he's heard that noise in his ears of going back to Montreal for years. So I feel like he tried to shut that down a little bit, but he would have been my pick for the most likely of some of the players you mentioned to leave their current team to play for another one.
Yeah, well, look, his agent was Kent Hughes throughout his career, the new general manager of Montreal. So, I mean, I think it's natural to draw that link. Chris Letang, someone too, that his name's been in trade rumors at various points in his career. He hasn't been a certain 100% Penguin the whole time. Evgeny Malkin way back, actually, there was some trade rumors around him. So, anything's possible. Like lots of great players. The Steve Yzermans are rare, I guess, or the Nicholas Lidstroms, players that play only for one team. And so, the money might be better somewhere else for Chris Letang, or maybe even the term on a contract given his age. And maybe he's wondering about playing at home. I have trouble criticizing that with any player, no matter where they're from. I mean, family considerations, maybe the team he grew up cheering for, like all that stuff. It's what brought John Tavares partially back to Toronto. It's kind of nice, I think, for players to try something new. So yeah, we'll see how these go. I mean, Pittsburgh's hoping to go on a playoff run here. I think they'd like to add players if they could. But Chicago's, it's a little different circumstance. You basically have to ask Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves, do you care about the chance to win another Stanley Cup? Because I don't think that they can promise those players, while they're still active players, that they'll have a team even good enough to compete for that. So it's really, are you fine just being a good mentor and seeing this through, or do you want one more chance? And, maybe after winning 3, they'll say that's enough. But, winning gets addictive, right? Winning is, there's such competitive guys too. I wouldn't begrudge them, I guess, if they wanted to chase a championship somewhere else.
I want to move on to one final topic before we get to stick taps. There was not really a report, but when we've talked about women's hockey on this podcast before, we know a best on best league is what is needed for the game, for the sport, just for everyone who's a fan of hockey to enjoy when it comes to women's players. Again, the conversation was brought up. I believe Chris Botta, who I think might have discussed on a podcast, the possibility of that coming back. I've seen fellow scribes, Marissa and Jemmy, say, hey, I talked about this early on in February. I think Haley Salvian's also kind of talked about this on her platform as well. There has been talk about this for quite some time. And once again, we're back at this well saying, hey, when's this going to happen? Is this going to be soon? CJ, I'm not sure what you know, but I'd like to know what you know. And I'd also like to get into a discussion about what you think a women's league needs for it to be truly successful.
Well, I think, what's happening is conversations have advanced beyond where they've been in the past in terms of seeing this through with the PWHPA and some NHL teams and sponsors about kind of creating teams that are affiliated with the NHL teams that could form some kind of league. And, by no stretch of the imagination is this done, but it does seem as though there's been genuine progress there. And that's where some of this hope comes through. And really it's clear to me what you need for a league. You need a league that pays the players living wages, where they don't have to have other jobs if they don't choose to, and they can train and focus full time on being professional hockey players and being, on their craft that way. And, give the PHF credit, because it's still a league that's given, women a chance to play and to compete against each other and get paid. But it's still not at a point, even with the recent announcement of bumping the salary cap, where, the players aren't making enough to live on it, quite frankly, without other subsidies or other jobs, other forms of income to support them. And so, I think that it makes the most sense to have a league either directly affiliated with the NHL or even just teams affiliated with NHL teams. You can share resources, you can play in those arenas, you can, I think, market to your fan base. It makes a lot of sense from a high level standpoint. And I think it's the model that will most likely to bring success. I mean, we've seen it in the WNBA, and that league's growing too. I know that they've come out, there's still issues there. I mean, look at this. This isn't like a wave the magic wand and you say, oh, the league's formed, every problem solved. Like, this is still going to be a journey. But what's encouraging is it sounds like that journey might produce some breakthroughs here. And, look, the Canadian and U.S. women's teams are going to reprise the Beijing gold medal game in Pittsburgh next week, March 12th. I think that there's a springboard here to build off the strong TV audiences the games in Beijing produced, the momentum from that, hopefully the momentum from next week's game. And so, yeah, I think we're going to see some announcements here in the relatively near future, and we've got to kind of see where it goes. But, you have to like that it's at least getting to the point where this is coming to fruition and a league can start to get off the ground. But, as I say, I think it will still be a building process as you go. It's not just like if you build it, they will come. I mean, it's still going to require support, and hopefully we can support it on our channels, Julian, when it does happen, and talk about it. And
absolutely.
Yeah, but I do think it's going to happen. I think there's going to be some teams launched that are affiliated with NHL teams, and I think that would be a great place to start.
I'm going to also plug the Noxie and Cax podcast, which is on our network with two great players in Liz Knox and Karel Lemar. They had a really great episode the other day with Cassie Campbell-Pascal, who basically bossed up and let everybody know that when I think the U18 championships for women were canceled, she was like, "Hey, I'm getting on the phone with the president of the IIHF." That's a boss ass move, straight up.
Doesn't surprise me.
No, doesn't surprise me at all. She's great. I think it is time for stick taps here on the CJ Show. It's something we do every Thursday where we give a stick tap. And I'm pulling out the mini stick here. I have another one, a lime green one that's still in the packaging that maybe I'll pull out for another episode. But we would like to show some love and show some shout outs to people around the hockey world. CJ, do you want to start?
Yes, and I apologize in advance for the way I pronounce the name, but Ivan Masichenko, that's not quite the right way to pronounce it, but he's come down with a serious illness. Likely won't play the rest of the season. He's one of the top draft picks for the 2022 entry draft. Was ranked by NHL Central Scouting as the 8th best European skater in the most recent rankings. Would have probably been a first round pick. Might still be a first round pick. I'll give him my stick tap. Reminds me a little of the Rodion Amarov story, unfortunately, the Leafs prospect from last week. Too young to be dealing with serious illnesses, but we send Ivan our best and hope that he comes through this okay, first and foremost, and that he's able to resume his NHL or his hockey career on the other side of this thing.
Yeah, Ivan. I wanted to second that as well. Just hearing about that just before we started off today. A little bit troubling to hear. I just hope nothing but the best for him. I'm going to give stick taps to NHL teams who actually came up with creative Black History Month practice jerseys this month. We are in March now, so we're a couple days out of Black History Month. Two teams that come to mind, the Kings, the Canadians. I believe the Kraken also had some nice jerseys as well. I think it's a cool, small gesture on the part of teams to acknowledge the month. Which, I mean, yes, I understand why the month is necessary to acknowledge that Black history is something that needs to be acknowledged and part of actual history, but it needs to be part of actual history. And Black history is not something that should be confined to the shortest month of the year. It should be something that's 24/7, 365. I make Black History Month every day. I do not need a month, but it is cool to see the NHL, at least in some small way, at least acknowledge it and have cool jerseys, at least for practice. Like it's fun. It was fun to see the Canadians unveil theirs a couple of days ago. And also for teams who took the time to take the pledge from Black Girl Hockey Club as well. We're seeing more and more teams do that. I think it's just really cool to see as we try to have more diversity within the ranks of the sport, not just in media, but with the players and the fans as well. It's good to see them get on board. There's so many more steps to go. But I just think I'm willing to give the NHL a little bit of praise for the work that has been done so far on the part of its teams with jerseys and other inclusion measures. But again, still a lot to go. So I'm going to give my stick tap to some of those teams who did that over the last few days.
The Sharks did a cool one too. You should check that one out if you missed it. They actually went back to the original designer of their logo was a Black man, and they had him sort of stylize it again differently. And I liked what he came up with. So yeah, it was nice to see. Teams, it's bit by bit, Julian. I think there's a bit more each year, and not fast enough, maybe, but at least there's some progress there.
At least we're trying. They're trying their best at the very least. With that, that's going to do it for our Thursday edition of the CJ Show. CJ, always a pleasure to do these shows with you. We will be back on Monday or Learn Z, depending on what part of the country of Canada you are from, with a brand new episode. We'll have the trading pile back. We'll have more trades and rumors to discuss, I'm sure. Hey, maybe even some team will make a trade by the time we record a new podcast. Who knows? We'll have that to talk about. Join the SDPN Discord if you haven't already joined the SDPN Discord. Go to sdpn.ca. The Discord link is there. Subscribe to all the other podcasts on the SDPN network, including ours, if you haven't already. Subscribe to the SDPN YouTube page. And I think that's going to do it for all the housekeeping I have to do, because there's just so many things you just have to plug. I didn't even mention the SDPN shop. I'm wearing these really comfortable Dangle Navy sweatpants. They're very comfy, but there's also really cool Coburg merch as well. for the SDPN. I really want to do this Coburg live show whenever this happens. Whenever that happens, I really want to do it. I know you do.
We'll make it happen. We just got to wait for nicer weather too.
Oh, we're in March.
The best of my town. The best of my town.
We're in March. We're not that far off from getting better weather. For CJ, I'm Julian saying so long. Peace. We're back on Monday with a brand new episode.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.